The dilemma is whether he throws in the towel and accepts complete political extinction at this point, whether he crosses the Rubicon in full force and does a Sulla, marches on Rome and takes possession of the city and attempts a full frontal assault on his enemies, or whether he tries something else. By choosing to enter Italy with only one single legion, Caesar is in fact doing what he said he was doing and taking with him in effect a personal bodyguard rather than his full army. He had other legions in waiting, certainly, but initially it's with one legion against the world that Caesar crosses the Rubicon.
Caesar's power base, the Triumvirate, had now disintegrated. Crassus was dead and Rome was in turmoil. There was rioting in the streets. The Senate appointed Pompey as sole consul in an effort to restore order. Pompey, ironically one of Caesar's oldest friends and allies, was made a virtual dictator. His task was to stop Caesar. But Pompey feared Caesar's army and fled to the eastern edges of Roman territory. Caesar pursued his enemy's legions all over the Mediterranean until they met for a decisive battle at Pharsalus in Greece. Although outnumbered 2-1, Caesar emerged the victor, but at the cost of thousands of Roman lives. It had been a battle Caesar had tried to avoid. He had made repeated pleas to Pompey in a vain attempt to avoid yet more civil war. Caesar blamed the divisive Senate, bitterly remarking, "They chose this." Pompey fled to Alexandria in Egypt. Caesar followed, still hopeful of a reconciliation.
When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, a group of Alexandrians came to Caesar and presented him with Pompey's head, at which point Caesar turned away, wouldn't look at it, and started weeping, eventually accepting Pompey's signet ring, oddly enough. But then what Caesar does is very interesting. He rounds up, as far as he can, the assassins. He can't quite get hold of all of them, but he gets hold of as many as he can, notably one Pothinus, who was vizier to the young King Ptolemy, and these men are executed.
If Caesar wept, it wasn't for long. An extraordinary woman was about to enter his life. Her name was Cleopatra, ruler-in-waiting of Egypt, and worshipped as a goddess.
On the one hand, Caesar knew that Egypt was of vital strategic importance as a breadbasket for the Roman world. Any Roman government that cannot feed its own commons with imported corn is going to find it very difficult to rule. So Egypt's important, and Caesar wants a compliant Egyptian government, whoever that may be. On the other hand, Cleopatra has been involved in a very bitter struggle with her brother for supremacy in Egypt, and for both her and her brother, it would be an extremely good asset politically for purely domestic consumption to have the most powerful man in the world visibly on their side. So even if there was a romantic element, I would say there was some pretty shrewd political calculation going on as well.
What started as good politics blossomed into one of history's greatest ever love affairs. Leaving his troops kicking their heels, Caesar took a holiday, cruising with his lover down the Nile aboard the sumptuous royal barge for 6 languid months.
Cleopatra is an absolute monarch. She's worshipped as a goddess by her subjects. She doesn't have to bother about oversensitive Roman senators or anything like that. She just rules. There's a possibility that made Caesar sit up and think a bit.
Caesar's return to Rome was marked by a procession of unprecedented magnificence. It celebrated his victories in Gaul, Spain, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Caesar's popularity had reached its peak, and he used it to change the face of Roman politics. Caesar was given a 10-year appointment as dictator. Was this the end of the Republic and the birth of a monarchy?
The Romans had traditionally abhorred any form of monarchy, at least for themselves. They regarded monarchies as essentially oppressive and regimes which were made for lesser people than themselves. So any notion that Caesar might be aspiring to a kingly position would, of course, tell publicly very much against him.
But Caesar's private life still caused disquiet amongst the ruling elite. Although unable to marry Cleopatra, he had brought her and the son she had borne him to Rome. it sparked rumors of a dual kingship of both Rome and the Egyptian Empire. But amongst the people, Caesar was as popular as ever. In 44 BC, he was again elected dictator, this time for life. He began to adopt regal dress with purple and gold. He issued coins faced with his image and allowed his statues to be adorned like those of the gods. As he set about reforming the calendar, naming the month of July after himself, one of his detractors was heard to say, "Caesar dictates when the sun rises and when it sets." But Caesar's election as dictator for life set the stage for his downfall. The aristocracy valued one thing above all else, libertas, freedom. Caesar's Rome was a monarchy, and they had no stomach for it. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, 3 days before he was due to leave for a military campaign in Syria, Caesar attended the Senate. He had no idea he was walking into a murderous conspiracy. As he stood reading petitions at the foot of Pompey's statue, a conspirator moved to talk to him. It was the signal for attack. Dagger after dagger plunged into Caesar's flesh.
As he dies, he pulls his toga over his head because he cannot be seen to be brought so low. Even at that stage, he's thinking of his, the Roman word is dignitas, his status. So even at the death, he's concerned about that status that's been motivating him from the beginning of his life.
Caesar wasn't expecting assassination. In fact, so far was he from expecting it that he had actually disbanded a bodyguard some weeks previously.
One of the most notorious of the nobles who conspired to murder Caesar on that March morning was Marcus Brutus.
In the sources, it's even more telling than that. He seems to say to Brutus as he stabs him, "And you, my child?" And this is how people interpret this is as an allusion to various stories that went around that Brutus's mother. We know that Brutus's mother was a lover of Caesar, but the rather unpleasant possibility arises that Brutus was actually Caesar's son.
4 days after his murder, Caesar was cremated amidst scenes of public shock and grief. The crowd's mood soon turned to anger. The assassins were hunted down and brought to justice. Gaius Julius Caesar transformed Rome from a growing republic into a mighty empire, which encompassed most of the known world. As Caesar had said, "I have lived long enough, whether measured in years or in glory." His life became a legend that has continued undiminished for more than 2,000 years.